The Stage Door Show, celebrating the independent artist. With your host, Dave Hondel.
Hi everyone, welcome to the Stage Door Show tonight. I'm Dave Hondel. I have with me filmmaker and the founder of Lee H. Jordan Extras Casting. I'm looking forward to our conversation here about his important work that shines a light on Black history in our country. So please welcome my longtime friend, Lee H. Jordan. Lee, great to have you on the show with me tonight.
Dave, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. Yeah. And to share what little information that I have.
Well, you often highlight African Americans who helped, create the history of our country through your filmmaking and also your great social media posts that I see a lot. And, talk about the importance of learning our country's Black history.
Well, one of the things that's been important to me is I want people to understand that I consider this to be not just African American history or Black history, but American history. And from the point and from the standpoint of the contributions that people of color have made to make America great.
Do you think, that was well said, by the way, it is American history. It's the factual history, I should say, about America. The factual history of this country is told. It would open the eyes of many in our society, I believe. And,
yeah.
Do you find it that way as well?
Well, first of all, one of the things that's been important to me is actually finding my own family history. And once I started really kind of listening and connecting with, as we like to say, connecting with the history of our ancestors, I realized that I happen to be standing on some very amazing shoulders. Yeah, both men, women, and children. So, and it's not because of who I am, it's because of what they've done. Yeah. So to me, that's a big part of what I do, why I do it, and why it's important to me.
You mentioning the history, one of my favorite shows, my wife and I watch Dr. Henry Louis Gates a lot, and Finding Your Roots. I think if anybody out there is looking for great programming, I mean, that's one of the best programs on TV, I believe. And, Henry Louis Gates, interviews a lot of celebrities, but, he brings them back to their roots and sometimes back to, 1600s. And, it's amazing what, they go back and find. And it really teaches you a lot about, American history, African American history. It's just amazing to me and just eye opening. So I implore everyone to watch that program if you get a chance.
No, I would definitely agree with that. But I just one of the stories recently that I think Clint Black found out that he has African American ancestors.
Yeah, I mean, according to Henry Louis Gates, we all do. We all have ancestors that can be traced back to Africa, because that's where this world began, essentially, is in Africa, and it all can be traced back there. So I think, if people knew that and people understood that, I think that would change their own beliefs.
Remember that it's like the joke with the bullies. It's why you hitting yourself. Why you hitting yourself? It's like.
Yeah, no, it's very true. Lee, also, you're in Minneapolis, Minnesota, which is ground zero for the recent movement for the civil rights after the murder of Mr. George Floyd. And, how did that impact your message? And do you feel that it was a necessary event in our lives to shine that light even brighter on the racism, to say enough is enough?
Wow, that's truly a question for the ages. But as far as I'm concerned, for me, when I was born in 1956, it was the end of the bus boycott. And history just continues on with every little step that has been made. So, so when you get to the point where, what's the phrase that you said, I can't breathe, that became like the mantra. Yeah. For a younger group of people, which is important because it's the younger people that maybe will have to carry this banner the rest of the way, because there needs to be stronger shoulders, other than the ones that we have. So there needs to be younger, stronger soldiers to carry this battle all the way through to the end, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it definitely does. And one of the other things that you mentioned as far as the younger crowd, I know that during a lot of the protests that were happening in the summertime, one of the bright spots to me was that the fact that there was multiracial groups of people marching, and to me that was a great sign that like you said, the younger crowd I think is going to carry that banner going forward. And it was actually very it was nice to see that there was multicultural groups doing that. So speaking of history, this is something that I thought it's very interesting, because I think I'm a big fan of history. I've always got into history, but the one thing that I didn't know that's kind of coming out to light recently through documentaries on television and also on news feeds online, obviously reputable news feeds, is that when we talk about Black history, I think this is apropos that is being kind of brought out this month, but Abraham Lincoln. There's a lot of stories coming out here, and I wanted to get your take on this. But in the world of politics, even back in the 1860s, decisions were made for political gain. But the freeing of the slaves was a little more complicated by some accounts, and the history books, I think, left out important facts about Lincoln and his motivation for the freeing of slaves. And I wanted to read a little excerpt from a history online history site for educators. And back in 1862, there was a letter that Abraham Lincoln wrote to Horace Greeley, and it read in part, "If I could save the Union without freeing the slaves or any slaves, I would do it. And if I could save it by freeing all the slaves, I would do it. And if I could save it by freeing some and leaving others alone, I would also do that." So talk about that and some of these revelations that are coming out to light now with Abraham Lincoln during that time frame.
One of the things when I hear that, what comes to mind is that, what's that old saying? You can please some of the people some of the time, and some of the people, most of the time, and some of the people none of the time. That was one of those situations. Well, how do you do one? Because if you do one, it's going to affect the other, and vice versa. So to be in a situation politically, to try and balance out, the idea of this world needing to change, in a way that really had to focus on the one issue at this point in time that was important, along with other issues as well, but it was important, the idea of slavery, whether it be ended or not. And that's what caused the Great War, or the war against the states. It's because of slavery. So to be in a place where you have to balance everything, every move that you make, every breath you take, because people are watching and wanting to either help you, destroy you, but it was a no-win situation. So as far as I'm concerned, and as far as my ancestors are concerned, if I can speak for them at this moment, I appreciate whatever was done to end slavery, because as I stated on my Facebook page earlier, I said, yes, I was born a freeman. My dad was born a freeman. Grandfather barely, but when you talk about his father and so forth and so on, they were slaves. And I'm only 64 years old. So that's not a long time to be trying to change over 400 years of oppression. So that's my. I hope that kind of made some kind of sense.
No, absolutely. And I think the end of slavery was the most important piece, regardless of what the politics were involved. But I think the reason why I brought that up, and one of the things that I've been thinking about a lot lately, and talking to others on other podcasts that I've done, was systemic racism. And I think that is the fact that these facts are coming out now, and they weren't in the history books when you and I were in school, I think speaks a lot to systemic racism, where I think some things were purposely swept under the rug. And I think systemic racism, there's a lot to to that, and I think some of it is what's in the history books and what's omitted from the history books.
Oh, well, I mean, if you want to go one step further with, you look at coins, Lincoln is he's facing to the left where everyone else is facing right. And his penny is actually the darkest, coin. So now if you want to read something into something, check that out. He had a few, like I said, he had enemies as well because they didn't want him to do what, that either needed to be done, and if it wasn't done by him, who would have taken up the banner?
Also, the original Africans arrived in Virginia in 1619, and the day they were made free was July 19th, 1865, which is known as Juneteenth. And I know that's something that you work. A lot of your work is based on Juneteenth, and so tell our listeners what Juneteenth is that don't know, which I think everybody should know, but. I think not enough people know what Juneteenth is. So talk about that and also your work with Juneteenth, around Juneteenth.
Oh, absolutely. I'm more than happy. Juneteenth is an annual observance to celebrate the date that the Union soldiers enforced the Emancipation Proclamation, freeing the remaining enslaved people in Galveston, Texas on June 19th, 1865. And Texas was one of the last states to rebelling following the end of the Civil War, which was allowed, the actual end of slavery. Which Juneteenth is also known as Freedom Day, Jubilee Day, Liberation Day. And as far as the modern Juneteenth celebration is concerned, it is our goal to make Juneteenth an international holiday celebrating emancipation for all those that have been enslaved in the United States and the world around. So that, to me, is what Juneteenth is, on one level. And there's many levels of why I celebrate Juneteenth, but that is the textbook, sort of explanation of Juneteenth.
So talk about your work around Juneteenth, and talk about what you do, the work that you do to bring that day to light, and how people can find out about that work that you do.
Well, I would say one of the first things that some people may ask is like, well, why don't you celebrate the 4th of July? And I would say to them, if you get the chance, you should actually read what is to the slave is the 4th of July by Frederick Douglass, because he actually explains in a much better way than I can, why Juneteenth is a little bit more of a celebration of Independence Day, especially for African American people or enslaved people. Period. So that's the first part. So, but Juneteenth for me is a complete celebration of history, of culture, of community. It's almost like a great big family reunion, to tell you the truth. So that's another reason why I celebrate Juneteenth, and I also celebrate it simply because this is also the opportunity, which is what I do. I try and bring a lot of the visual history to life. As far as we had a gentleman there who actually one Juneteenth that plays General Granger, and he reads General Order Number 3. And one of the interesting things about that order is the fact that they asked the slaves to actually stay on the plantations that they've been enslaved on, and asked the masters to hire them on. And I'm thinking to myself, if I was a comedian, I'd be going, now, you got to be joking, right? But yet at the same time, that was part of the statement for General Order Number 3, which General Granger read to the free people. And not to mention the fact that what does freedom mean if you've been enslaved for at least 3 or 4 generations of your family? So there's a lot that can be brought to Juneteenth as far as enlightening history, enlightening people, enlightening the culture itself, and actually highlighting some of the contributions that have been made. So that's why Juneteenth is important to me. One of the reasons why Juneteenth is important to me.
And one of the things that I told you before we went on the air is the fact that I work in New York City, and obviously with COVID, it's been almost a year since I've actually been in the city. But once we go back, to working, not working remotely anymore and going back to the city, the one thing I wish everybody could take the train ride that I take from my home near Philadelphia to New York City, and see that I am with several different cultures and different races on that train, and everybody's in the same boat, going to work, looking at their phones, sitting next to each other, standing next to each other, and everybody's just doing their thing, and nobody shows any animosity towards each other. I mean, everybody has biases, but on that train ride, everybody is fine being next to and standing next to all different races and cultures. And I think that a lot of times racism is bred out of fear of another person's culture. And instead of learning about that culture, I think sometimes people hate what they fear. And I just would implore everybody to educate themselves and learn about other cultures, and you won't fear it anymore. And I think that if everybody did that and we learn the history of other cultures, I think that, racism, which I don't think will 100% ever go away, but I think it would at least educate people and may change some minds. What are your thoughts about that?
When you talk about the train, a lot of the Negro spirituals and a lot of music kind of talks about that, the friendship train and, the love train and so forth and so on. So it's almost a symbol of transportation from one point to another. So if you're riding along, you're kind of noticing that, as you said before, that this person may be reading a Kindle or reading a newspaper, whatever they might be doing, but you just realize that they're just like me. Yeah. Or I'm just like them, or you start to find a common bond. Yeah. And once you do that, you'd be surprised at what we all have in common. And that will also eliminate those fears. And you're right, fear is also a big part of that. But also there's another part where, as my mother would call them, the instigators, would actually promote certain things so that you would look at someone and go, oh, they're one of those because they do this, this, and this. So that fear kind of is there. But if you start to just share a meal together, you sit down and have a meal with someone that you don't know, and see if you can kind of find that common bond between you. And that common bond is freedom. The freedom to be able to support your family, the freedom to be able to have a roof over your head for your family, for yourself, or whatever. All those things that we almost kind of take for granted, in a way, but it is an important part of understanding that we're all in this boat together, or all on this train together.
Yeah, no, that's well said. Another thing, Lee, I wanted to ask you about your thoughts, because you grew up, or you were born in the 50s, the mid 50s, and I often watch, different television shows back, like Leave It to Beaver, and some of these shows that were, Happy Days, that were set back in that time frame. And, I hear so many people say, white people saying that, man, I wish I was living during that time. What a simpler time that was. And, man, those truly were happy days. And the white picket fence. And I look at them and I say, do you realize, think about the African-American people that were growing up and living during that time, where segregation and race riots and things. I mean, do you think that was truly a happy time? And I have a hard time believing when I watch these shows on TV that, the life of somebody that was African-American was not happy days. So what are your thoughts on that? Because you grew up during that time.
Well, I would say, first of all, that when we talk about, separation, we're really kind of talking about a lot of people of color, period, not just African American, but the list just kind of goes on. But one of the things that's important to me when I look at these shows now, I think to myself, oh my God, this is this is hard to kind of swallow. But when you think about the important things that are supposed to come out of that, the respect of family, the respect of person, the respect of a lifestyle or choice, those are the things that kind of come to the surface, hopefully enough that someone would realize it's like, wow, that has nothing to do with race, creed, or color. That only has anything to do with just being a decent human being. You know, I look for the cream to come to the top. Yeah. And by doing so, I can make myself a better person by trying to be a more supportive and enlightened individual.
No, that makes a lot of sense, and I'm glad you gave me your input on that, because, like I said, from my perspective, I was looking at it like that time wasn't, but if you look at it like that, obviously that makes a lot of sense about the respect. Yeah, because you see shows now that it really doesn't, take place a lot, with the respect, and it's usually violence and that type of thing. So and disrespect. So yeah, definitely, and if you look at it through that lens, I definitely agree. What is your one message, Lee, that you want to give to the listeners out there about your message about Black history, about learning Black history, and just what is your one message you want to give to my listeners before we sign off here?
Well, I would say the one thing that I really want to stress is that we are talking American history, not just Black history, but American history. And any other persons of color that have contributed to the greatness of America, it is your history too. And that we all have a piece of the puzzle. So as we grow and learn and support each other, bring those pieces together so we can have the whole story.
Thank you for that, Lee. And now, Lee, before we go, I also want to talk to you about your work as a filmmaker. You had a short film called We Turn the Page. It's about a grandfather passing on his love of the public library to his grandchildren. I know you've done other work too. So talk about some of your filmmaking work and how our listeners can go find it.
Well, We Turned the Page, like I said, yes, it was my first short film, and it was for the Minneapolis Public Library. What I wanted to do was to kind of point out that the public library was not always so public. And so I decided to write this little story, but at the same time, I wanted to give the information, to people to say, look, knowledge is power. Yeah. And if you have knowledge, and you use that right, then that's part of the message itself. So, and that's pretty much a lot of what I do as far as my films and projects that I work on. The Family Guardians is my take on the fact that the ancestors are always with you. Yeah, that you stand on strong shoulders. You stand on the shoulders of people that have made it from darkness into light. Yeah, and that because they did that, you're here. So the Family Guardians is a look in that direction. So to me, it's a viewpoint. The viewpoint that I have is the fact that we are not the victims of slavery. We are the descendants of the survivors of slavery, and that's a whole different ballgame in my book.
How can people find you on social media, and how can they, like I said, how can they get a hold of you if they have questions about your work and they want to learn more about your work?
Well, I would say for sure there's a page that I have and a website that I'm working on to get more details onto it. It's called Juneteenth Speaks. Yeah, and like I said, it's Juneteenth Speaks. That's a Facebook page and a website. And from there, I work with our Juneteenth celebration here in the Twin Cities and the National Juneteenth Foundation, by the way, which I am the Midwest and State Director for the National Juneteenth. So the NJOF.org is also a place where you can find more information about Juneteenth.
No, yeah, and I just, like I said, I implore everybody to go to the website and learn more about Juneteenth. I don't think there was enough written or anything when I was growing up about Juneteenth, and I think it's an important thing that people learn about, and I think that of all races, I think everybody, in order to educate yourself, you need to learn about American history. And Lee, I think you just opened a lot of eyes today, and I can't thank you enough, first of all, for joining us, and I can't wait to have you back in the future and talk about hopefully we can get back out there and do your Juneteenth celebrations. Hopefully by that time, with the vaccinations and COVID will allow us to get out there and be by each other as opposed to do everything virtually. So looking forward to that. And again, thank you for joining us tonight, Lee, and looking forward to our next discussion.
Absolutely. Remember, Juneteenth is freedom.